so how many of you would consider yourself runners? Okay. How many of you have ever gone for a run in your life? Okay, great. So I'm not a runner. This is not a story about running, but I do run. And if I stopped running every time it felt uncomfortable, I wouldn't run further than the door of my house to the door of my car in the pouring rain. But I don't run to avoid discomfort. I run because it's the best cardiovascular exercise there is. I run because of the way my mind feels after about 10 minutes in. I run because I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they're running into the street, and I need to catch them. So my point is that when it comes to running, we expect a certain level of discomfort. Discomfort is part of the process. Discomfort isn't a sign that we're doing it wrong. It's a sign that we're doing it at all. Okay, so it's 11 o'clock. I'm finishing at night. I'm finishing up a long day at a nonprofit staff retreat and going back to my room at the end of the day in the elevator. So the doors to the elevator open, and in walks a young woman who reports to my friend Bill. And so she looks at me and she says, "Oh, I was just in Bill's room. We were going over a few things for next week." So I'm uncomfortable. So on the one hand, Bill is my friend. I know Bill, and I know this young woman well enough to know that they probably were just going over a few things in his room for next week. They work long hours. We were out of town. I understand, right? And besides, a meeting in a hotel room in and of itself, it's not sexual harassment. But I have some other things going through my head as well. So I'm thinking, gosh, our organization, we haven't had any training on sexual harassment. Oops. I'm thinking, gosh, this young woman has to meet with a whole bunch of external stakeholders in our community. I wonder if she and Bill have had any conversations about how to make those meetings safe. I'm thinking about times I've been in hotel room meetings with colleagues and it's been totally fine. And I'm thinking about Harvey Weinstein and how a culture of acceptable hotel room meetings is what allowed a lot of people to get hurt. And then frankly, I am also thinking about what, sort of these facts as reported, what they would look like as a front page news story, either about my friend Bill or about the organization. So I'm pretty uncomfortable. But what I know for sure is that the discomfort that I'm feeling is a sign that I need to have a conversation. And so the only question is, what conversation am I going to have and with whom? So Bill was the person that I knew the best in this situation. So I started with Bill. So the next morning, I wake up and I was like, dude, I care about you. And just, I wouldn't have meetings in my hotel room. It's not a good look for you. It's not a good look for the organization. We talked for about 20 minutes. I kind of laid out my thinking on this. I figured I'd give our CEO just like a quick heads up that I had had this conversation and we would be done, right? No, wrong. So Bill got offended that I spoke to him about this at all. And so he went and vented to the young woman in the elevator. She got very upset. The next thing I knew, the whole thing had blown up like boom, like a giant landmine. I have a peer who's angry at me. I have a young woman who won't even make eye contact with me. I've got an operations director who's never been trained in HR. And I've got a CEO who's getting chewed out by their lawyers because they haven't done sexual harassment organization as of yet. So stressful, right? And I'm the expert. So if this is how these conversations go for me, why should we expect anybody else to even try them out? So believe me, I get it. I get what it feels like when you kind of step on that emotional explosion and it doesn't go well. Because they feel awful. These explosions feel awful in the moment. And of course, we all want to avoid this. But emotional landmines, they're not actual explosive devices, okay? These are unpracticed, unspoken conversations. Conversations about boundaries, conversations about power, conversations about how to behave at work. And if we want to create organizations and communities that are free of sexual harassment and violence, then we're going to have to create a map of these landmines. And we're going to need to intentionally and strategically blow them up. Sometimes we'll be able to dismantle them, but sometimes they're going to just kind of pop off in our face. And we've got to feel comfortable in that moment, like when you put your foot down and you hear the detonator and you're like, oh God, it's going to get bad. You just have to do it anyway. And I've learned over time that these messy emotional explosions, like they are not actually going to kill me, right? They feel uncomfortable, like a run in the moment. And I may have cried in this situation, but the effects are undoubtedly positive. So I learned this lesson for the first time when I was 11 years old, when I blew up my very first landmine. It was the night that I told my mom that my grandparents were molesting me. We were visiting their home in Oregon, and she was tucking me into bed, and I just blurted it out. To her credit, my mom believed me. But still, I will never forget the look of shock on her face as she walked out of the room to go talk to my father, and how I heard their voices raised late into the night. And the next day, my parents spoke to my grandparents, and I have no idea what they said, but I know that our family was never the same. And at the time, I thought I did something wrong by telling. I thought I did something to break my family, and I did. Break them. In a good way. But I also knew, even at age 11, that my grandparents, like most abusers, they found their power in silence. And not just the silence of their victims, like me, which was grounded in fear, but the silence of everyone around them, which was grounded in discomfort. So this silence, this moment, this stillness that comes over the room when I share just a tiny bit of my personal story. This is a moment that's currently fascinating to me in the context of workplace sexual harassment, which is like the sort of latest area of my conversational obsession. This is a moment that I bring into professional spaces on purpose. Because as much as we would like to separate the personal from the professional, we can't. I bring my personal experiences to work, and I stumble on your personal experiences while I'm working. I'm not alone in having a story like this. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men, 1 in 2 transgender individuals have experienced sexual abuse or assault in their lifetimes. And I can't tell when I'm talking to you about your sexual harassment policy whether you're a survivor too. I also can't tell if you've perpetrated sexual harassment, if you've laughed at a joke that you didn't think was funny, if you have an intimate partner who was raped in college. I can't tell whether your parents ever talked to you about consent, healthy boundaries, how to behave at work. And I can't tell whether you have any skill at all when it comes to speaking up in the face of uncomfortable things, or whether you'll stay silent. So this has proven to be one of the trickiest parts about sexual harassment training in the workplace context, especially training that works. And so it should go without saying that the purpose and goal of sexual harassment training ought to be the prevention of sexual harassment and not just the prevention of the next lawsuit. So imagine, let's just imagine a world for a moment where we could have a mindset that compliance and prevention could exist together. Sort of how might we think about this approach? So I would think about it as, gosh, let's give people skills, not just definitions. Let's give people questions and not just answers. And let's have people practice on fake landmines before they stumble on real ones. So, how many of you have ever kind of wished for a do-over conversation, right? Yeah, exactly. So do-over conversations are, of course, possible. They're hard and they're tricky. Practice conversations are actually a lot easier. So, just imagine if we had worked through some sort of, appropriate meeting place scenario before I ran into this young woman in the elevator. But then this is where I get back to running. So I can take people to the track. I can assess their skills when it comes to having these kinds of conversations around running. I can teach them to run safely. I can take them for their first mile run. And it's a skills clinic, right? So a skills clinic with a good coach is always going to be better than a lecture on how to run. And it's definitely going to be better than a rule against tripping. That's a zero tolerance policy. But if we want this to work and to actually be scalable and transformational in our organizations and in our communities, people need to actually go running on their own, right? So this is what brings me to Paul. I love Paul. This is Paul. Paul is the chief operating officer at a small company called Next After, and we met at a conference reception, and I was telling him about my work and about kind of how I'm obsessed with conversation. I'm the founder of the Uncomfortable Conversation. There's no small talk when you talk to me. And so Paul and I started talking, and at the end of our conversation, he said, so basically what you're saying is that if individuals and organizations have more conversations, then everything gets better. And I was like, yeah. He's like, well, so we should just all do 30 conversations in 30 days. And I was like, yes, Paul, yes, we should. Why don't we try that out? So he gave me his phone number, and the next morning I woke up and I started texting him. I texted, good morning. Were you serious about having 30 conversations in 30 days? Let's start today. And so I sent him articles about workplace sexual harassment. I sent him articles about Aziz Ansari. I sent him videos from the Uncomfortable Conversation that I produced. I sent him challenges to share things on social media. And we kind of went back and forth on this for a couple of weeks. And at the end of it, we were debriefing on it, still by text, because I've never actually spoken to him again. And what he said was that through the experience, that the discomfort that he felt never actually went away. But he got used to it. And he realized that once he got into the conversation, that it was fine, and not just fine, but meaningful and productive. That it was starting was the hardest part. So I have this aha. I'm like, aha. So maybe this isn't just about skills. Maybe it's also about your habits. So then I lived your best life for 2 weeks because I become obsessed with habit. I think I met Saul during this period. I'm obsessed about habit. I'm reading everything that I can get my hands on. I'm reading The Power of Habit. I'm studying Elevation Church, and I'm studying Weight Watchers, and I'm thinking about CrossFit, and how am I supposed to get these people to get these habits, right? And so then I have a training the next week. So I just decided to pick a number. It was 7. So I was like, 7 conversations in 7 days. That sounds fine. and so I started, right? So 7 chances to create a habit. So I wish that I knew that 7 was the magic number, because I don't know how many conversations it took for me for this to become a habit. So, maybe it was the conversations that I had with fraternity presidents to get them to show up at a sexual violence vigil when I was in college. Maybe it was the conversations that I had with my therapist as I was healing from sexual abuse and assault. Maybe it was the time that I shared an infographic about false accusation of sexual assault on the internet and it went viral and everyone hated me. Maybe it was the time that I was on the train and I yelled out, "Did anybody else see that guy's penis?" And nobody answered. Maybe it was the time that I was on Twitter, the night that the Me Too movement broke, and my account got suspended because I sent hugs and hearts to too many people. But here's the thing. I'm not here just to tell you my story. I am here to create a world where there are no more stories to be told. And if we are going to do that, it is going to require the best of what is in this room and in our communities. It is going to require data. It is going to require innovation. It is going to require futurism, which I didn't know what that was until this morning, but I think we're going to need it. It's going to require dance and poetry and hip hop. It's going to require all of us. It's a story that we have to write together. And my mission really isn't to kind of stand up here and talk to you. It is to talk with you. Because what I know is that every time we choose conversation over silence in the face of uncomfortable things, we're taking one step towards creating a world that we might actually want to live in together. So let's run. Let's run. So if you want to run from the door of your house to the door of your car, if you want to run around the block, if you want to run for your first mile, like, let's run. Come find me. Like, whether it's today, tomorrow, or any day that you are left here on this planet, come and find me. Because uncomfortable conversations, for me, they're not just a skill, they're not just a habit, they're my life's